Dear. Okay, so it's recording now, okay? All right, so it's the main name for all the exams, and this is the one that we know most familiar. We're most familiar with the 11 plus, and it's children in about, in year 5 who would be sitting the exam at the beginning of year 6. So the preparation, a lot of it happens in the run up to definitely year 5, throughout year 5 and the run up to it. Now, depending on where you are in the country, the exam is going to look slightly different. Some of them will include 4 skills: verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning, reading, English, and maths. Okay, so they'll have those 4 big skills and they'll split them up. Some of the exams have gone completely online. Some of them that happened during COVID. So some of the exams are completely computer based. I don't know yet the pattern of how the majority will move to, but it's completely computer based for many. And some are still paper based. The majority of them are still paper based. And some of them have a hybrid approach where you have a part of the exam online and then you have a part of the exam which is paper based. Okay, so it depends on where you are. The first step when you are trying to prepare for your 11 plus is to find out what the format of your exam is in your area, and of course the schools that you are aiming for. And you might find that depending on how many schools you're trying to get into, the formats will be slightly different. Okay, so up and down the country, we used to have the GL and the CEM, and now CEM no longer do these exams. All right, so you might see on some forums where they're saying, oh, CEM, GL, and a lot of publications that are out there which are either format which were the official exam boards, but CEM no longer delivers these exams. So we've got GL exams, we've got Future Stories now, which is another type of exam board. Some of the exams are actually run by or delivered by Atom, which is an online subscription, but they actually organize some of the exams. And then you'll also have some schools that create their own exams. So certainly in the region that I live, South Croydon and South London, then the schools in the Sutton schools create their own exam papers. Okay, so they don't really follow a format, but in terms of preparation, you're going to be looking at any of the publications that are out there and just integrating them both. So any of the worksheets and books that are out there, whether or not they say CEM or GL, amalgamate them, use them both, because they'll be still covering the same kind of skills. And then you can just eliminate, if there's no verbal reasoning in your exam, you can eliminate that. If there's no non-verbal reason, you can eliminate that. Right, so I want to just first of all go to vocabulary, because this is such a big deal in the 11 plus exams. Ultimately, the people who are going to be marking the paper and making decisions about who come into the school are ultimately looking for a demonstration that the pupils' work in front of them is conveying this idea that they are a literate young person. Okay, so you're trying to get across this idea that I am literate, meaning I can navigate through the English language, and I can manipulate it. I know how to use the skills. And even though this is a very young age, let's say if we're aiming at 11 plus, this is a very young age to mark this. They're really just looking for the potential that this is a child that has the potential to be able to learn and to work at within the pace and the style that we have in this learning environment. So that's ultimately what you want to be able to showcase in any test that you do, and that's what they're looking for. So there is some theory behind it, because we do have some evidence-based research that tells us something about the kind of vocabulary we'd expect the children to be good with, to be secure with by the time they get to 10. And you may be surprised to know, or you may not, that they're looking to see that by the age of 10, that this child has gone through a rapid expansion of vocabulary, by the age of 10, because that is the usual development milestone that a child goes through, and that they can showcase that they've got and here comes a big number, that they've got almost about 10,000 words in their word bank. Now, it sounds astronomical, absolutely sounds astronomical, but this is the capability of our young minds. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll up to these vocabulary milestones. Okay, so for the very early years, we're looking at, you know, from birth to around 2, 3, 4, we're looking at them to be secure with around about 50 words. All right, round about 50 words. We're looking for them to be secure. And these are commonly used words. So we're not expecting them to have any kind of obscure words in their diction, in their repertoire, but we are expecting to see signs of around 50 familiar or commonly used words. Now, a lot of the detail that I'm going to go through in this section, I'm actually going to be able to send to you. So I will give you a word list of what those words are, okay, for the early years, for the years between 5 to 7, 8 to 9, 10 to 11. So I can send you those lists after the session, okay, if you're interested, to give you a guide. Well, it's a list of those kind of words that we're expecting a child to know as they go through the different ages. Okay, so we're expecting younger learners 50 words or so to be secure with. Now, you can, of course, enhance this, and there's lots of different ways that you can enhance your vocabulary. And it's not going to be anything surprising. It's the kinds of information that you get told from very early on when you take the child to the clinic, and this gets reinforced when they start school or when they go to nursery. So the most important thing is that when we are learning vocabulary, and this is a top tip, but it's one that we all know but forget. So the top tip is this: when you are trying to develop a vocabulary, I can see something in my chat. Please to words list. Yes. Okay. So you're on live, so I will definitely send out the words list, Kia. Brilliant. So, okay. So when we're trying to develop the vocabulary very early on, we will want to mimic anything that reflects the authentic way we learn it when we are learning our first language. Doesn't really matter what that language is. Okay, so when you're learning your language as a child, all you are doing is listening. That's all we're doing. We're listening. As a baby, we're not really able to say anything, express ourselves verbally yet, but you certainly are absorbing a lot, so that by the time you come to speak, you're actually mimicking the things that you have heard. Now, this is important because this is the way we learn language. Now, when we are looking at preparing for 11 plus, sometimes this can get very skewed, because sometimes what happens is we go straight to things that are produced and labeled for vocabulary, like flashcards, which do have their place, but certainly it is not an authentic way to learn language. So you want to bring in activities that mimic the way that we hear words and then copy them. Hear words and then copy them, because that is the most efficient. It is the quickest route to embedding the meaning of a word into our long-term memory. I've just got a sign here saying my connection is unstable, so I hope there isn't any glitching. If there is, please let me know in the chat, okay? And I'll repeat. Okay, so we want to introduce any kinds of activities that help us to be able to hear words and then later on to mimic them. And so the first thing that a parent can do is upspeak. All right, so when you're looking to prepare a child or put them on a vocabulary pathway for 11 plus, you are going to consciously weave in words that you probably wouldn't usually say daily or in your day-to-day speak, but you're going to consciously start to use words that you want the child to be able to learn later on. And so when I send out the word list, you will be able to see the kind of words we expect them to know, and then also compare that to the kind of words we're hoping for them to know as a child that has a shining potential. So there's two word lists there. There's a word list depending on the age that matches the ages of the children. And then there's a word list that is a little bit more stretched, which is vocabulary for the 11 plus. Now, I want you to be very careful here. When we buy publications to help ourselves to practice and to work through, it is very easy to get publishers or to get material that have a lot of obscure words in them, meaning that some people will provide or create a document or a resource that has just some of the toughest words that are there are in the English language and put them in. But I want you to be very critical when you're looking at some of these words. If these are words that you've never heard or very rarely heard, that is enough guide to tell you that this needn't be learnt at 11 plus. Okay, I'm going to say that again. You can use your gut to judge the types of words your child needs to learn. If it is a word that you very rarely heard as an adult or have never heard of before, okay, then this is most likely a word that you do not need to know for 11 plus. The 11 plus is not measuring that you know all the words in the English language that have existed and have ever existed. It is not measuring that. It is measuring that you have the words we expect you to know and some higher order words, and that you can navigate with those words. You know how to use them. So again, I'll be able to send out 2 lists, ones with some 11 plus vocabulary on it, which is not full of obscure words, but will be looking at words that are at mastery level. So a child who is performing as if they're at ES6 level, that kind of vocabulary, but not obscure vocabulary. So be very critical of material that you get, because sometimes this can lead to unnecessary pressure and unnecessary wasting of time learning words that you're absolutely never going to see, not even at GCSE, in order to get a grade 9. Okay? So that's the first thing. When we're trying to build our vocabulary, we're going to be speaking to the child a lot. Before they can speak, we're going to be talking to them, engaging, looking in their eyes, and just holding what you do naturally as a parent, but you're going to perhaps do it more. Even when you don't feel like it, you're going to be speaking to them, because what that does is it stimulates, it elicits what we call conversation from a child who hasn't got a lot of vocabulary, but it elicits that kind of interest. So even if they don't have all the words to be able to really fully engage and interact with you, they are interested. They become interested in what you have to say. And if you do this deliberately with a very young child, a baby, you will notice that that baby will babble more. Okay, you will notice that baby will become more vocal, even though we cannot distinguish the kind of words that they think they are saying. This is the very first early step in developing a child who has the potential to grow a repertoire. It starts very early on. Okay, so if you've got anybody that you can encourage, this is when they have young children or infants rather, then this is definitely something you can tell them to start to do. And again, it's not magic, it's not new theory, it's based on old child developmental milestones that has always been there, but sometimes we just forget, and sometimes we're tired and we don't want to do it. But certainly if you want to build 11 plus vocabulary, then you want to start these skills over a longer period of time, so that we don't suddenly get to year 5 and there's a big push on for vocabulary, because it is the hardest thing to acquire. Very often what happens later on down the line in year 5, when we're trying to push a kind of a deliberate pack of vocabulary down to a child, that they can memorize the words, so they can tell us what the words are, but they don't know the meaning of the word. So we can memorize by seeing something and by hearing it, but unless we use it, we don't know how to apply it. And I see that a lot in writing, and when children are using words, you'll see it, spot it in your infants, the little ones, that they might use a word and use it in the wrong way, which is a perfectly good, well, it's perfectly normal process of learning, but it also shows you that what you can do is you need to encourage the right usage of the word from early on, and that takes time to do. So when examiners are picking up our exam papers for the 11 plus, we can see the children who have been force-fed words. You can spot it a mile. Okay, these are the children who will overwrite because they don't understand really how to use words in the right way so that it's effective. So we can spot force-fed vocabulary teaching. And so when some of the schools says we don't want tutors, you don't need to be tutored, or we don't want tutored children, we know that we have to get practice for the exam, but these are the kind of evidence that they don't want to see a lot of. A child who has just been flashcards, 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 and memorized a lot of words, but actually doesn't know the true meaning of the words. So vocabulary building takes time. It takes years. Now, if there is a reason that as you are beginning to develop your child, you see that somehow they're not learning in the expected way, then that's a different conversation. Okay, so my middle son is dyslexic, and I noticed that once I had started training him. Okay, so I noticed I wasn't very aware when he was 0 to 1, and certainly when I look back now and after getting him diagnosed, I can see that of course there were impediments there. But certainly when the children are older, if you think there is a block, then we can look at that, but that's a conversation for another time. So this information is based on if all things are as expected, not if there is a learning need of some kind there. However, even if you have a learning need, you're going to need more time to be able to absorb this. Okay, so you can see it on the map there that between age 5 to 7, that is the time. Ages 5 to 7, that is the age that we expect this big expansion to take place. Their brain has evolved and developed to the point where we can actually absorb the most amount of words we're ever going to at one point in our young lives by that point. So you can, all the activities that you can build in around vocabulary, it will be soaked up. It will be very productive at this stage. And so by the time they get to 8 and 9, we're expecting them to be able to now do something with the vocabulary. We're expecting them to be able to understand opposites, the synonyms, similar words. And I've got here on the sheet idioms. This is really important, expressions. Okay, because this helps with the child's ability to infer. So the vocabulary is going to help with comprehension. And the earliest signs of this is when we're getting to the age where we expect them to have complex language, not just complex words. We're expecting them to be able to put words in a sentence together and to be able to have and draw out lots of different meanings with it. So these are where we start introducing activities where we're not just looking at meanings of words, but we're looking at what things are suggesting. So we begin to infer. And certainly when I'm working with the year fours, we're introducing inferencing skills. So we're looking at the words and we're picking these words out, and we're now looking at all the meanings that they have around words. And what I'm going to do here is actually just demonstrate this. So I'm going to take this off your screen and I'm going to bring up my whiteboard. Okay, so I'm going to bring up my whiteboard. Thumbs up if you can see the whiteboard. Just make sure it should be on your screen now. Yeah. Just make sure we can see. Okay, thanks, Sarah. Okay, thank you, Kia. Right, so we can see the whiteboard. Okay, so when we're doing, very early on, okay, a game that you can play with your little one, okay, to start to develop this idea of inference is looking at word associations. Wordplay. Now, what this does is it gets them to think not just about the narrow meaning of the word, but all the things that we associate or connect with that word. Okay, we can play it very simply. There used to be a game I could play, but I could not remember it for this. But if I was to say, and we can look at word and phrases for this. So it doesn't have to be one word, but it can be phrases. So if I was to say the color red, and when you play this game, you just want to actually limit the thinking time. You don't want them to think about it too quickly. You actually want them to give instant reactions. So when I say the word red, you say what comes to your mind. And you don't give any time to think. It's at the click. What comes to your mind when you say the word red? Okay. So for me, when I think of red, I think of danger. Okay, guys, you can contribute. When you think of red, do you think of anything? Does anything come to your mind when you think of red? So it can be things in the environment that we see. It can be anything that you can be a bit abstract. So ruby, okay. Okay, you think of ruby red. So you think of a shade or a gemstone. Let's see. Fire, yes, fire. Okay. There's so much more because once, let's see what's got. Alert, yes. So alert. Yes. So there's something there's a bit like my danger there, Kia. So yes. Oops, okay. Little Red Riding Hood, yes. Yeah. So Little Red Riding Hood. Now, the most important thing is that when you're playing a game like this, there's nothing wrong. All right, there's nothing wrong. Their thoughts aren't going to be wrong. So it's quite encouraging, a game like this. It's very encouraging because they can't be wrong. You're asking them about their thoughts. So their thoughts are going to be right every time. Okay, it's where their mind is going with these associations. So it's very encouraging. It's meant to be a very positive activity. Now, the reason you limit the time they have to think is because you want them to be instantly recalling something that they associate that has been fed into their minds subconsciously even. So if I was to say, oh, the traffic lights, it's not because I've learned that, it's because I've gone down the street and seen it time and time and time again. And so I make that connection every time I see it. And so what you're trying to get them to do is a couple of things. You're trying to get them to see the connections that red can mean, all different types of meanings, all different types of ways we can think about it. But you're also trying to get them to develop a skill where they start thinking quite actively, quite quickly. You're trying to get them to be quite automatic with retrieving what is inside their mind. Okay, now this kind of word play, even though we're using it's very simple, this kind of word play links to not only comprehension, but also creative writing, because this is actually one of the steps that we use when we're trying to expand ideas. So when we focus on vocabulary, vocabulary is specifically linked to 11 plus, the 11 plus measures, because it can tell us something about perhaps the words that you know that you can use in writing, not always, but it can give us that hint. But it can also tell us about your thought processes, which is where we can therefore measure a level of ability. Okay, so red, danger, fire, ruby, alert. Now, if I was going to take this vocabulary, so these are things that you can do with your child. You don't have to just limit a vocab goal lesson to vocabulary. You can pan it out so that it links to writing. Okay, so red, ruby, gemstone, you can show me what that looks like. If you're using a very young child, ask them to draw a picture. Ask them questions that, oh, who do you think would, which character or who do you think would be wearing such a gemstone? You'll find that very young children probably tell you something fantastical and they'll speak out a scenario in their mind, which is always going to be great because it's igniting creativity. If you say something like alert, then you want them to explain, what do you mean? Yeah, alert, okay, some kind of warning. What do you mean? So again, what they're doing is coming up with synonyms. So different words that can be expanded just by looking at what we associate with red. And then we can look at the links that we make with other words that mean the same kind of thing. So what you are doing is, again, unconsciously, well, you are consciously doing it, but it's unconscious for the child, is feeding in their ability to think of other words that mean the same things. Synonym, building up synonyms. Okay, which of course helps to develop their vocabulary range and their ability to also explain things more clearly, because they have more words and therefore more tools to be able to pan this out. Okay, so the first game here to look at inference, word associations, words play, and activity. And if you do activities like this, you'll be surprised at the amount of words and skills that you are teaching the child with outside of a formal teaching environment, outside of anything that looks like tuition. All right, but just by gameplay. And so when you come to the process very early, it is a great opportunity to start weaving this kind of activity into your interactions with the little one, so that they begin to embed it where it matters in their long-term memory. And we then rely less on the flashcards and the worksheets, etc., later on. Of course, those things have a place. All right, I'm going to take off my screen again. So we were talking about this complex language, antonyms, synonyms, and looking a little bit at how we can develop that through games. And again, there's a few resources that are attached to this. So not only will I send them, but I'll put them in the group under guides. So I'll put the slides in the guides, and I'll also put the resources for parents in the guides so that you can go and download it. Okay, it won't be immediately after session, but I will put a note in the group to say when these are uploaded and available. Okay, all right. So when we have idioms are expressions. In our talking to our children, I want us to weave in some expressions, things that people say. This is going to help with understanding not only characters that they read about in stories, but also when they understand in the mood, okay, which is a big deal in reading comprehension. So we're lifting vocabulary, not just from a one word, but also sentences and understanding, okay? So if we're going to feed in anything in the early years, in the ages 5 to 7, 8 to 9, even just coming up to the exams, we're going to feed in things, the expressions that people say, and explaining those, because these things have to be explicitly taught. A lot of them we don't say anymore. And so the children have no frame of reference. They can't match it and try and figure it out very well. But a well-read child, a child who has had years and hours of conversation, will be much more skilled at being able to decipher what this suggests. Okay, and so when we get those exams where they have passages with expressions in them, with things that characters are saying, and we're trying to be able to answer, well, what do you think the character is suggesting? What do you think the character is feeling? This is testing the years of vocabulary and conversations you have had that helps you to know these. Okay, now some of them can be rote learned, but many of them, because they go out of fashion, cannot. Okay, going to move on a little bit. So some of the strategies that you can use at home with the children, again, there's no magic in any of the things that I'm going to share today. But the first one is, of course, in modeling. And when we model, it just means we do something that the children can copy. So just like when I said about authentic ways to learn vocabulary, we're going to look at authentic ways that we can show the children what is done best and that they can then do it themselves later on. So the first thing that we can do is this idea of we read with them, okay? Reading is a social activity. It's not an activity that you say, give them this book and they'll go and I've read that. I can tell you now as a parent that my youngest son, my children are grown now, but my youngest one is 17. And certainly when we were going through the 11 plus prep, I gave him reams and reams of books that I was interested in, okay? And that was the mistake. So he got a place in a grammar school, but he definitely didn't read all the books that I was giving him. Okay. So, and he told me that after, it was a bit of a joke. He goes, oh, yes, I never did actually read that. So find out, of course, the things that they're interested in. All right. The books that they're interested in, because otherwise it's counterproductive. So if you have the time to sit and read with the children, of course, you're not going to have the time to be able to do this always. But if there is a part in your 11 plus program that you are going to put in, it is about modeling the behavior you want them to then be able to do independently. So you're going to read socially. Now, if you were to do anything that would be able to encourage this habit, then joining a book club helps. I know that there's another tutor in this group that is launching a book club over the summer, but these things do help because especially if you have a reluctant reader, and that's a whole other topic by itself, but especially if you have a reluctant reader, we want to try to excite them. We want to try to excite them. Now, I put a poll in the group maybe last week. The group's only been up a week and a few days anyway, but I put a poll up asking, do we think that reading or being an avid reader is crucial for the 11 plus? And most people said, yes, it is crucial to pass the 11 plus. And I'm actually going to be quite controversial because it isn't. Okay, it isn't. Reading is necessary for lifelong learning, and reading exposes us to words and phrases and moods, etc. But just being an avid reader doesn't turn us into a good writer, and it certainly doesn't mean that we pass an 11 plus exam. What it can mean is that we can see references more easily, because chances are that if we've read a lot, you've seen these ideas and these things said. So therefore, you've got a shortcut to understanding, but by itself, it doesn't mean you pass the 11 plus. Okay, by itself. It can be an advantage, but it doesn't. I work with children who enjoy reading and love reading, but there is a long way to go between that skill that they have or that they enjoy doing and actually being skilled up to pass a test. Okay, so yes, it is a crucial component, but being that skilled up in that component alone doesn't mean we get an 11 plus pass. Okay, so we want to develop the social reading so that, of course, we can navigate through texts that are going to be on passages. And we want to make sure that they're not in a corner somewhere just reading a book, because children can read without paying too much attention to every word. We can skim and scan. We want to introduce a wide variety of themes and genres. We mostly understand what genres are. Okay, we understand if we're putting in a bit of gothic or horror, or we're putting in a bit of fairy tales and magic. We understand what genres are, but themes is something that I want to spend a couple of minutes on. So themes themselves are big life themes. And again, I'm going to put a guide of what themes are, because this is a big deal, again, in understanding comprehension. So themes are things that people go through in life, okay? No matter the era they have lived, okay? No matter the era they have lived. So I'm going to go to my whiteboard again, and I'm just going to skim through some of the themes. Okay, so some life themes. This will help them up to GCSE. So some life themes are like love, okay? So relationships, loss, okay? So what I mean by love, it can be relationships within families, Okay, the love you have for a parent, the love you have for a child, the love you have for your sibling, your brother or your sister. These are things all humans experience. Okay, loss, again, you might have lost a pet. Okay, these are things humans all experience, not necessarily loss of a pet, but loss of someone or something that you love. Loss is a theme. Love and relationships is a theme. Conflict is a theme. Every human experiences conflict, no matter the era they were born. So conflict might be conflict physically, might have hopefully not a physical conflict, but more commonly an emotional conflict. So something going on in the mind that we have a dilemma about, or that we'll worry about, that causes us stress. Okay, so conflict, okay, we all experience emotional conflict. Okay, so we have conflict, love, loss. Other themes could be things like age. Okay, so generations, difference between the youth, okay, and the elders, AI coming into fore. Okay, so progress. So these are just some of the themes. I don't want to make it too complicated, but what has this got to do with the 11 plus? Well, when we understand certain vocabulary, we understand that they're linking to certain themes. Okay, if a character expresses a certain idea in a text, we can link that to certain themes. The reason you're going to start introducing this to your children, you don't need to use the word themes, but you can say, ooh, that sounds like it's quite a conflict. That sounds like they've got a big problem here. We learn this when we're writing stories, the conflict, okay? All right, we learn the resolution. Okay, so we learn about these ideas because all of these ideas help us to understand things we read. So now it's no more than taking a word, we're building it into ideas around themes. Every 11 plus paper you will ever sit that has a comprehension question on it is going to be asking you what it's about. What is the main idea? What is the theme? They're going to ask a question of this sort. No matter what region you're in, what type of paper you're sitting, whether it be online, whether it be a paper-based, because this is crucial to our understanding and connecting with what the story is saying. So if we're going back to helping our children, to putting them on that pathway, then something you can introduce expressions, but you can also introduce in your questioning about their reading, the kind of ideas that it connects to. Now, learning about themes is a bigger topic, and it's certainly something that I can put guides up in so that we learn how to explore and how to expand. But it's a little bit like how we expanded the red. All right, looking at how does that make us think about this idea? All right, I'm going to stop short because I know that we're running super duper out of time. It goes so quick. Okay, so we're back now. Can you just confirm that you can see parents' effective strategies, that the screen has changed from the whiteboard to this? Yes, okay, thank you. All right, so when we're looking at characters in our reading, we want to really zoom in with this. All right, again, part of it, look at the character, ask them questions where they're naming the emotions of the character. This again is a big deal. Children do not have the vocabulary around naming emotions. All right. If you're looking at what kind of words to build with your children, emotions are a big category. They generally know happy, sad, and a few other words, but that is the area that that's going to help them the most with understanding why a character might next do the thing they're going to do, why other characters are behaving in the way, why a character says something the way it's been said. So emotions and naming the emotions is a very useful tool when you are thinking about, well, what can I help my child with in terms of vocabulary? Well, emotions are going to be always helpful in their primary school career, and later on past the 11 plus all the way up, they're going to have to be able to describe how people are feeling because of the events they're about to experience or have experienced. So when we bring in different themes and genres, there's our themes. You want to also try to start to introduce them to poetry. At a very young age, they've already been introduced to poetry through nursery rhymes. But the other thing that poetry does is it introduces them to classic kinds of poems, to classic and traditional tales, but more importantly, to intonation, to rhythm. And this is really important because that links to mood. When you're reading and you're going above vocabulary and you're putting the words in sentences and all together and learning how to manage words in a complex way, it's using these higher order skills to look at the words together and see the mood through the way the writer has written it. So poetry starts to introduce us to the way something is spoken, the rhythm behind the words, the intonation, the way it is said. Okay. And that links to characters and the moods around them and the way that the writer has created mood. So again, when we're looking at games, we can build in these games that guess characters. And again, I'll give in the guides a little list of names that you can, games that you can play that have to do with thinking about characters and also predicting what characters are going to do based on the evidence we have. And I've already talked about this idea of theme, which is crucial for atmospheric understanding and character behavior. We've already covered this as well, encouraging a love for reading. At home, if you can, create a space where they feel good to go to read, and make sure we put in books that are interesting to them. If you have, let's put would song also apply similarly here in there? Yes, songs, raps, because they are forms of poetry. Okay, Kia? So yes, they are, which is why when we're looking at encouraging and developing vocabulary, anything auditory is good, because remember, if we go back to the first point, anything that mimics the authentic way that we learn words by hearing is good. It stimulates us. So if you play songs, they will be picking up they'll often recite the words. I remember being able to just say the words of songs. Okay, I hadn't studied because I'd heard it repeatedly. It is a demonstration of how we learn. So songs, poetry, anything. If you want to play audio books, they're fantastic. Believe you me, they take in those words. And again, it's effortless and it doesn't feel like work. So it doesn't feel as stressful as I've got to read this book. If you have a reluctant reader, these techniques are much more encouraging and less hostile for them. Okay. So the first thing to remind ourselves is that if you have a reluctant reader, all hope is not lost. Not because you're going to turn them into somebody they are not, okay? But all we really need to do is be able to show them how to manipulate and navigate for a text. Reading does help that, but I'm telling you now, we can show you how to navigate through a text, okay? So the reading doesn't necessarily have to be the causal factor to make you be able to pass the test. Okay. So of course, anything that helps them to hear words, phrases, songs, poetry will be encouraging a love for hearing stories. Okay, a love for hearing stories. And sometimes that does absolutely actually help to build creativity, helps to give them ideas for creative writing, and also helps to feed in concepts. So sometimes what happens is when a child perhaps hasn't read or hasn't had much conversation, then it's difficult for them to actually grasp concepts. Why? Because there's just not enough there. There's not enough exposure. So that when you're explaining ideas, sometimes you're hitting a bit of a brick wall. You have to go back to it a few times and you have to almost break down that concept for them to be able to grasp it. Again, this workshop is really a doctor's visit, we call it. So, it's a very quick run through of so many things that we can take and develop in a much bigger way, but I'm hoping to drip feed to the group over time so that we're equipped with things that we can do, which doesn't always involve a tutor. It's things that we can do at home, okay, without formal tuition, but we're looking at doing it as the best informal learners for our children. Of course, some of these can be separated into tasks for tuition, but how do we use that time that we have effectively so that we put them on that pathway? Okay. So some reading strategies, and we're going to finish up fairly soon because we know we want to go and enjoy our Sunday. Making sure that we're reading aloud when they're young. Very often they might resist this when they're a bit older. All right. They don't want to read aloud. It's slower. But if you have a child who does have a learning need or needs a bit of support, reading aloud is actually very, very helpful for helping to hear what their mispronunciation and therefore what words they don't know very well. But also it helps you to hear their understanding. Because when a child reads without being able to acknowledge the punctuation, it very often shows that they're not really reading and seeing how it's meant to be said. So it's the first signal to you being able to understand that they haven't quite got this. Okay, so one of the things that you can do at home, if you've got an older child, you can give them something to read from any of the publications, depending on their age. It'll be age appropriate, but let's just say we're looking at Week Junior, for instance, and you want to get them to read some more non-fiction. You're going to get them to read something not too tedious and not too long, maybe a paragraph or two. Keep it short so that they're not turned off. All right, get a paragraph or two, and then what you're going to do is just ask them just to read that aloud. Now, in order to do that and for them to comply, for them to be willing to do that, you have to set up the atmosphere. All right, you're not just going to get them out of bed on a Sunday and said, right, Bob, I want you to read those 2 paragraphs, because you'll get a little bit of a kickback. But you've got to set up the atmosphere so that you know you're talking to them and that they're feeling like, yeah, this is something I want to do. Or maybe you can say, oh, look, my goodness, did you hear about this? I read this in Week Junior. Did you know this? Read out that paragraph for me again. I read it, but I don't remember it. Okay, and get them to read it out loud to you, and then say to them, oh, right, okay, what did you mean by that sentence? Because it sounded all jumbled up. Can you slow down for me? So when you're encouraging them to read, you don't want to make it sound as if you're a teacher. You want to, be a little bit discreet in how you're asking them to be able to reread something and asking them to slow down. Because what you don't want is for them to feel that you're criticizing them. All right. What we want to feel is that you're encouraging them. And if there are any errors, then the errors are on your part in terms of not understanding, so that you build up that rapport and that reading doesn't become this thing that is a measure, this thing that is an assessment that you do with them and then turn them off further. But it turns into something that they know you're going to be really interested in them hearing. And so they'll want to spend time doing. Okay. And the rewards don't have to be a practical reward. The reward can be praise, can be, oh my goodness, I didn't really understand that. But now that you've read it slowly and now that you've emphasized those words, I get it. All right. So just giving them that feedback, which is encouraging and praiseworthy. All right. Poetry as well. Don't forget poetry. We get tested in poetry at 11 plus, and it is the text that the children find the most challenging. They're very used to doing a lot of stories. They get presented with that a lot in school, but poetry, not as much. So again, if you were to weave in some kind of material, go for poetry, because that is the thing they don't get to see enough of. And I will definitely do a poetry session just on poetry to see how we go about, what our approach is going about tackling poetry. All right. Collaboration, we've already looked at. There's 2 I's in that. That's a spelling error. Please forgive me. All right. So again, reading shouldn't just be over there unless they're telling you, okay, I just want 5 minutes to myself to read. But we want to be pairing. It's a social activity and there's discussions around it. And again, I'll give you the kind of questions that you ask the students. One of the most important types of questions are your predictive questions. What do you think they will happen now? Sometimes when you ask a question like this, even though it may seem like an open question, They might just go, I don't know. And that's it. And it's shut down. So how you can phrase this is, I bet Julie is going to steal into the castle at night and try and grab the crown jewels. And then they might say, no, don't be silly. That's not going to happen. And then you go, no, I think that's going to happen. And then they might start to converse with you and say why that won't happen. So what you are doing is, instead of just asking a question, what do you think might happen, which might not get a response, you make up a suggestion which might be nonsense, okay, for them to disagree with. You're using just a little bit of psychology here for them to disagree with, and then they will then tell you what they think will happen based on the information they've read. So again, another kind of strategy where you're not just firing questions at a child for them to feel, oh, I'm tired, I really don't want to answer this and I don't know anyway, or I don't feel like talking, but you're going to be weaving it in a way that they'll go, no, that they won't do that. Of course they won't, because, and then they'll tell you that. Okay. I'm glad you're finding it helpful. This is the objective, to be able to show you how to engage with a child. And I know that I'm giving you a lot of information, but over time in the group, I'm going to slow things down and focus on one area at a time so that you can get more from it and be able to practice it in a step-by-step way. As it was the first session today, I just wanted to give a flavor of the kind of information that I can share with you, and then break that down and then get other requests from the group that I can break down in slower chunks. So, of course, technology, use technology. It is your friend. Okay, don't use it. It's here to stay. AI is here. Go online, encourage the use of technology. In the years that you are leading up to 11 plus, it's about input. It's not about testing. All right. We really do leave testing until that period before the tests are coming up, year 5. In my year 4s, I don't test and time them. We do low stakes testing in around about year 4. So it's a review, but there isn't a pressure on timed exercises, because it's so important to foster the relationship and to make them feel this is great. Look how far you've come. It's amazing, without feeling that they're measured by a score. When they come to the end of year 5 and they understand, okay, this is a test, and they've got a bit more context around where they're heading, then the test becomes a little bit more, they understand it more, and then they'll accept it. Okay. When we're also reading, apart from talking, you're going to be bringing their attention, and this links to reading aloud. Hold on a minute. I didn't hear that sentence. Are there any dashes in there? Is there a full stop there? Are those words said in capitals? Did that character shout it? And what you're doing there is you're getting them to notice the punctuation and how it's been written. Okay. So you can play games and you can say, hold on, slow down, you're reading. I can't catch up. Sometimes I'll say to them, look, guys, you know I'm ancient. My brain can't process things as quickly as you. Please slow down for old ancient me. And they have a giggle and then they slow down. And then I say, if there's a full stop, I need you to pause there so that I can understand. If there's a dash there, I need you to have a longer pause so that I can hear. If there's an exclamation sign, I want you to say it with an emphasis so that I know how the person is saying it, because I need a lot of help. All right. So we're going to make it something that they're doing for us, because we know they're the experts when they're reading, and you are at the same time getting them to notice punctuation, which feeds into so much more. Okay, I've taken up enough of your time. I was going to go on to this idea of vocabulary question times, but I know there's a lot here and we've had an hour. Okay, so vocabulary question types. Again, our vocabulary is going to be able to help us to look at the types of questions we get. We're already going to have been feeding them synonyms. Well, by talking to them about the word associations. When you start doing that activity, you are getting them to think about other ways to say the same thing. Okay, building it from early. Antonyms, opposites. You can very often teach that deliberately, but they'll understand. Yeah, well, what's not like that? It also helps you for the negative question types that you get in, say, certainly the Sutton exams and different kinds of independent school exams, when they say which one is not like that. The word meanings just means that they can understand how the word is used appropriately, how that word is used. And of course, substitutions at the bottom left, they're linked to expressions. So you'll see here that by the time you start doing a lot of those tasks, you've already covered. Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Okay. All right. So once, by the time you get to the vocabulary question types, if you have implemented a lot of the developing vocabulary skills, they will be equipped to answer these types of questions. And then after that, it's just a matter of showing them the format of the particular test that they're doing and practicing how to do it in that particular format. But the type of questions, they will be skilled up enough to be able to do. Okay, guys, I'm going to end it there. I want to thank you for coming on. I hope you found that very helpful. Again, I'm going to put those guides in the guide section or in the group. Okay, and then I'm going to later on break things down slower to the group and drip feed them. Okay, so have a great day. All right, I'm going to end it there. Have a great day. All right, I hope you found that helpful. Bye-bye now. Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.